So, Resmaa Menakem, thank you so much for joining us again, discussing your new book, My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies. And we are continuing our discussion now of the book and how to heal racial trauma within each of our own bodies through breath work and body practices. In the book, I found it interesting. You discuss this topic called white fragility. So what do you mean when you tell African Americans in your book, and I'm quoting, "You are not white people's one-stop comfort shop"?
Right. So here's what I mean by that. For most of our relationship together, white bodies and black bodies, it is a relatively new occurrence that the black body has had dominion over itself. Now, I want you to just think about that for a second. That it is a new occurrence that I can tell you what I am going to do with my body without being murdered or without being raped. Do you understand what I'm saying? It is relatively new that I can say that to you, right? And so what that means is that for many years of our relationships together between white bodies and black bodies, the black body's job was to take care of the white body, to take care of their children, to take care of their household, to take care of their land, to take care of whatever. There is no place on the black body that the white body for most of our lives, for most of our history together, did not have unfettered access to. Total access to the black body. Total. And so that is a problem that I believe gets passed down to white bodies in terms of privilege and what the white body feels like it should have access to as it relates to the black body. But I also think within the black body, there are these reflexive things, these reflexive gropings to take care of white people because of some of that conditioning. And so that's what I mean by that.
See, and that's a very interesting concept because, again, as coming from the audience of, as you say, a white body, this is, I mean, it sounds silly to say it, but this is a new concept to me, that this is what you're calling white fragility as at naming it out as a thing.
Yes. So that's, yeah. Because see, here's the thing, and this is why I talk about white bodies needing to, and this is not a concept. White fragility is not my concept. White fragility is actually a concept that's developed by Robin DiAngelo, who's a friend of mine. And so, so to the audience, if you get a chance to read her new stuff, you gotta get her new stuff, right? Because she is she writes so beautifully in terms of this concept and beginning for white people to begin to look at some of these pieces because this is, so when we talk about the white body being standard, right? You don't have to think about these things. These things, your life will be fine if you don't have to think about these things. However, my black body, I cannot survive this society without understanding these things, the idea of race and racialized concepts, both overt and covert. There is no way that my people could have survived by just going, okay, it's over. Wait, it's over. Let's just keep moving, right? But part of the privilege of a white body and part of the privilege of developing the system based on the white body is that white people don't really have to think about it. It is not incumbent. Your survival is not dependent on you knowing the nuance of race.
Well, and you think about the ramifications, as you have mentioned in your book, of simply being a parent.
Yeah.
That goes way into, some deep water there. As a mom, I was reading this book and, I'm shaking because it gets into some deep water.
That's it. Quick.
Yes.
Quick. And so part of what I wanted to do with the book is to have people begin to do that shaking and do those pieces, because the concept because not to do it is dirty. To do it is cleaner. It's still painful, but it has the ability to build capacity in ways that the dirty stuff does not.
Yes, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Now, for our audience, can you discuss what is intergenerational trauma and historical trauma?
Beautiful, beautiful question. So historical trauma is really the trauma that gets passed down both through the body, through story, through wordless story, through visual, through all that stuff. It is the idea that something happened to a number of generations before. And there is a component of it that I still experience as energy. Right? When I'm talking about trauma, I'm primarily talking about energy. Just like Einstein said, energy can be neither created nor destroyed, right? And so when I'm talking about trauma, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how, but even though energy can't be created nor destroyed, it can be manipulated, it can be thwarted, it can be moved around, but it can't be destroyed. And so what I'm talking about is a thwarting of resource energy when I talk about trauma. And so intergenerational or so historical trauma is that sensory piece, not the cognitive piece, not the this happened in this time and that happened in that time and that happened in that, but the sensory piece that happens for us when we're exposed to something in the present, and it's all of this energy like that either feels or we experience as bigger than what's happening right now. So it has more energy than it should, or it has less energy than it should, right? So you can either have a big reaction to something, or you can have an underreaction to something.
Okay.
And when that happens, you're usually dealing with historical stuff that gets passed down. So if my grandmother's 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 grandmother was raped, and repeatedly raped, and all the women around her were repeatedly raped. When she has children, the children that get born, the way that mama acts, they don't know that it's because mama was raped. They begin to see it either as mama's personality or as part of the culture. Then the next generation begins to see it, and they don't know that mama was raped, that it wasn't part of her personality, it was her protection. The reason why I can't feel mama is because mama can't be felt, because to be felt is vulnerable. To be felt would allow her to be damaged in ways that she may never recover. So the reason why I can't feel her is not about her personality, it's about the fact that she's protecting herself. Right? So now I'm 2 generations removed from that now, right? So that happened to grandma. I'm just talking about my mama. Now, then you keep going on for 400 years.
Yeah.
Right? And then I'm not even talking about the epigenetic effects, that what gets passed down, not in terms of resequencing the DNA, but what shows itself and what gets changed as a way to protect, right? What we know is that in research now is showing that the egg, when somebody's traumatized, that the egg is changes, that the epigenetic expression changes. Well, research just came out recently that says so does the sperm, right? So if that happens, these things get passed down, and by the time they get to me, it looks like culture. Right? By the time it gets to me, it looks like personality. By the time it gets to me, it looks like family trait. But it may have started off as a way to thwart further damage that was happening. Do you understand what I mean? So when I'm talking about historical trauma, I'm talking about this thing that happens that we may not have a cognitive realization of, but sensorily, but meaning, but vibratorily, it shows up in a protective response, even if I don't know why the protective response is showing up.
And is that where you're saying traumatic retention derives from?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Imagine being a white body, and I'm 5 years old, and my daddy takes me to a lynching. And I'm watching this lynching, and everything in my body wants to go turn away, right? but all of the environment is saying this is a fun thing.
This is
All of the
acceptable.
environment, right? Not just acceptable, but there's nothing wrong. Not just acceptable, but there's nothing wrong. But the body is going, this is horrible.
Right. This is not
The
acceptable.
smells are horrible. What they're doing today to the cries are horrible.
Yeah.
Right? What gets instilled in the white body that gets passed down, that then gets connected with privilege, that then gets connected with, you see what I mean? So that's another way of a traumatic retention, things that get passed down, that also that gets coupled with rage and gets coupled with privilege and gets coupled with all of that stuff.
And inner conflict between
That's
what
right.
you see and what you are feeling.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. And it gets passed down, and then it can look like culture.
Now, how do we make sure that we don't pass on traumatic retentions to future generations?
Well, one of the things is just what I talked about in the book, is through the practices and through other practices, and not just my practices, but practices that have been handed down and reclaiming practices that have been handed down. We have to start to create spaces and environments for people to begin to actually, first of all, articulate that this is a real thing. A lot of people don't even want to articulate that this is actually even real, right? Just like you said, okay, that happened in the past, let's get over it, right? And so part of what I believe has to happen is that we have to start creating communal spaces and communal ways of beginning to deal with, not just individual or objective ways. We have to start to begin to deal with this.
Now, you say that, white Americans who seek to undo white body supremacy have no culture within which to base such a movement.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting to me. Can you talk about what that means and how they would go about creating a new culture?
Yeah. So let's just so I've been involved in all different types of movements and activism and all that different type of stuff. And the one thing in terms of white allies and people who are really like, racial, synergy and equity and all that different type of stuff. And one of the things that I've found over the years that I've done this is that the white liberal does not, they want to disidentify themselves. So they can say, those Trump people are the real racists, right? Or this is the real racist. And they have a very difficult time understanding that white supremacy is on a continuum, right? And that what happens is that many times white liberals will develop strategy to begin to deal with stuff, right? They'll come up with these strategies. The problem is that when it comes to culture, white liberals can't compare to the KKK. They can't compare to nationalists, right?
Okay.
Why? Because if I'm a young white body and I'm in search of something, the KKK has symbol, they have culture, they have song, they have color, they have rules of admonishment. They have rules of acceptance. They have all of these cultural things, right? White liberals have strategy, right? And that's not going to hold people. And so what I've been saying is that all of the good white people that say, I don't believe in it, I don't believe that, you have to actually develop something that can hold young white bodies. That is cultural, not just strategy, not just the right thing, right? It has to be through symbol, through song, through ways of being, through naming, through all of these different pieces. If you don't have that culture of the KKK and the alt-right actually looks appealing. And when we hear that, when I've said this to people before, people get just shocked, right?
Right.
But if you understand about what the body needs to have a safe place. The body needs to have a place to belong, right? And if you give it, it will take it in a dirty cup, right? it will take that piece in a dirty cup. And so what I'm saying is that good white people have to start to begin to develop culture, because the alternative is to leave the cultural pieces up to the alt-right, or leave it up to the KKK. You will have strategy and you will be absolutely right. And people won't, and the white body won't be able to feel you. That's why I was saying what a lot of groups are doing around the country with my book, and particularly white groups and a lot of seminaries. What they're doing is that they're studying with each other first and figuring out what happens for them before they start marching in the streets.
I understand.
Yeah.
Is this what you mean when you say that whiteness can take, it can mean taking responsibility?
Yes. Yeah. It doesn't, you can have whiteness. White people have to develop whiteness without the supremacy. Right now, it's infused in the culture of America that whiteness and supremacy are one and the same. And it has to evolve to culture, not just to white. White people gave up culture in order to be white. That's just in this cut. That's what happened. And now, are some people Italian? Are some people from French? Or some people? Yeah, absolutely. But that is not the overriding structure that we live in. We don't live in a French structure. We don't live in a German structure. You know what I mean? We live in, and you can't separate those two now. At one point, they were not the same thing. Now they're blended, right? You can't separate those pieces. And white people have to begin to figure out how they're going to do that, how they're going to begin to challenge that.
When you talk about evolving societies, society as far as the three audiences of white bodies, black bodies, and police or law enforcement bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so coming back to the idea of working towards a unified society, you talk about evolving policing. Can you talk about the evolution of policing in America into a community policing model?
Yeah. So when I talk about community policing, one of the things that has to happen is that the structure of policing, internal structure of policing, has to change. The internal structure of policing actually chews police officers up like gumballs. There is no organizational care structure in most policing, right? So the trauma things that happen to police officers, like going to a fire and a baby dies, shootings, almost getting hit by a car, smelling death, all those different types of things, right? Those things, police officers from the academy are taught to override those things. Override those horror responses, much like I talked about the lynching, overriding those responses. Police officers, as a structure of policing, are taught to override that, mm-hmm. right? And then what happens is most rookies who come in are going to work overnight shifts, right? Because the day shifts are you put in your 10, 15 years, you're going to do a day shift. Most of the time, you're going to be working overnight shifts, right? So in the overnight shifts, they're going to see and smell and experience things that they have to override. There is no way of helping them. Currently, the structure does not help them settle down through that stuff. So what happens is after 5 years, they find themselves stuck in the constant activation. So then their wife goes or their partner goes, well, what's wrong? And they go, nothing, right? Because the structure has not taken care of them in a way to help them articulate what actually happens to their body when they're exposed to other traumatized bodies. Traumatized bodies, traumatized bodies. And so police officers are not taught about that, and there's no structure to support that. So it's not until they do something or they start having a drinking problem or they're on their third divorce or their kids hate them and nobody can feel them or they're assholes on the shift and all this different type of stuff that people start to begin to open up a HR issue with them. Whereas if we had actually articulated the indicators beforehand, we might have actually been able to help people be better people and be able to actually do community policing, as opposed to community policing being just a theory that we teach somebody but we have no organizational care infrastructure to help people actually do it.
That sounds very, very important.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It is.
Well, I know we're coming up on time, and I really, really appreciate your time today and look forward to hearing you at the National Wellness Conference in
Thank
June.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
And most of all, getting to meet you in person. Thank you so much for your time and your courtesy and your patience today. This has
Don't worry.
really been
Yes.
wonderful for me.
I'm so looking forward to it. I can't wait to see you.